Again, I am Tiffany Lee, and I'd like to talk to you about a little survey that we did asking beef producers what they thought about antibiotic use and antibiotic resistance in their industry. So I'm going to give you the producer perspective. I want to start out by introducing some of you who may not be familiar with beef producers in the United States to some of my family, my former clients who are actually beef producers. So here, this is my brother. His name's Brian. That's actually a twin calf that was abandoned by mom. Apparently she only wanted one. But he is very devoted to his cattle. He actually, he remembers a loan payment for his heifers because he makes it on my birthday. So that's how closely tied he is to the cattle industry. And this is Ken Winter. He owns a feedlot out in Dodge City. They run about 30,000 head of mainly heifers. And Ken and his boys, his two boys actually let us, we do a feedlot rotation for the fourth-year vet students, and they were gracious enough to let our students come out and tour the facility and answer any questions that some of these students have. They were very involved in educating these students during that rotation. This is Mike and Colleen McCormick. They are former clients of mine. Colleen is actually a very good friend of mine now. She still calls me every now and then for advice. And of course, she's usually the boss around their operation. As is this girl here. This is Kara. She's my sister-in-law. These two, I don't know if my pointer will reach that far. There. These two are married, and those two are married. But the boys in the picture are not, so. Moving on, this is, well, the guy over here on the left is my boss, Dan Thompson. Most of you probably know him or know of him. And the man on the right is Perry Owens. And he runs a feedlot out in Minneapolis, Kansas. And again, we took the fourth-year students out to that feedlot there, and he loves having these students out. He spends a whole day with them. He lets them process cattle. He goes through closeout sheets with them and explains everything about his operation to these students. So he's very, very involved in helping educate these veterinary students and moving them along with their careers and helping produce those veterinarians that we need. This is Marv Thaler. He is a former client of mine. He loves working his cattle. He's vaccinating some calves at branding. Marv and I have a very good relationship. We enjoy bantering back and forth. I went out to vaccinate his horses one time on a very, very cold, very rainy day. And, afterwards we got done. He asked me to come in for a cup of coffee and some cookies. And when we got done, I said, okay, Marv, we'll see you next time. I'll send you a bill. And he said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll send you a bill too. And I said, all right, whatever. So a week later, I get a bill, an invoice in the mail from Marv, charging me $2 for a cup of coffee and 50 cents for 2 peanut butter cookies. We had a good time over that. This guy in the pink shirt is Mike Tompkins, another former client of mine. Mike and I get along very great. His wife, Patsy, and I are actually very good friends. People often kind of give us some grief because they're about, in their early 60s, and people are like, why are you hanging out with people like that? And they're just good people. And so I want to share these people with you guys. And then this is Daryl Waite. Daryl, he runs a cattle ranch out in Lyman as well. And that dog there, his name is Tank, and Tank he helped run that cattle ranch out there. Unfortunately, this man, he says, I'm the only woman who has made him cry twice in 1 year when I had to, unfortunately, euthanize a horse that had a very bad injury, and I did have to euthanize Tank. And Tank was probably the best cattle dog I've ever seen in my life, and I've never seen a grown man cry that much. So Daryl and I have a very good, very close relationship, and we still talk today. And then another man that I have made cry at least once in my life is this man, and he cried when I went off to college, and he's my dad. So that's the only time, that's about the only time that I've made him cry. I want you to notice here, though, Everybody else was working with cattle, or working with cattle dogs, or something like that. My dad's sitting here working on his his planter, I guess. And it's why I want to give you guys the results of this survey. These cattle producers, a lot of times don't have the time to go out and talk to people about what they do. They don't have the time because they're working on other things. My dad doesn't just have 100 head of cows. He has, hay ground and other things like that he needs to work on. And so I want to provide him and everyone else that you've met here a voice. And so to do so, we've done this survey. And we see that we've given consumers a voice. I think that a lot of groups have given consumers a voice. Even scientific literature has given the consumers a voice, as seen here by this journal article in Emerging Infectious Diseases. We have different organizations that give producers a voice. We do have the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, NCBA. Our state livestock associations do a very, very good job. And of course, our organization that's putting on our meeting here, the National Institute of Animal Agriculture, for animal agriculture. But we don't see a lot of producer voice in the scientific literature or in academia that we can actually see. So I want to give you a couple examples of some preliminary work that's being done, and then we'll move into our work that we've done here. This is some work by McKendry and Tonzer. They are ag economists at Kansas State, and they actually surveyed producers and consumers at the same time, asking them different questions about animal welfare. And this is an example of some of their work. Their work is not published yet, but they have graciously let me share this information. So this is an example of how we're starting to give those producers a voice. So what we proposed to do was to survey beef producers and ask them about antibiotic use and opinions on resistance and opinions on consumer perceptions. So our survey, as we know of, is the first of its kind. We developed it at Kansas State University. A few veterinarians helped to develop those questions. And there were 26 questions, again, exploring antibiotic use and opinions of those producers. And I think this is important because these producers have firsthand knowledge of how and why antibiotics are used. So their opinions are very important. They may not feel that they're being heard, and that's what we want to do here. We want to give them a voice. So to go ahead and gather information for our survey, we recruited participation through different industry avenues, including Beef Magazine. We did put the link up on the Beef Cattle Institute website and their Facebook page. We had a little blurb in Working Ranch magazine, and of course NCBA helped us immensely with distribution of the survey link. The data was collected using Kansas State University's online survey system, which is Qualtrics, and the data was summarized using Microsoft Excel, and we're just going to stick to descriptive statistics because, of course, the nature of the data, which is survey data. So let's get into some results. We had 260 participants in our survey, and that is way more than I ever thought that we would have. About 70, 80 people, or 70, 80 responses, I was getting excited, and then we hit 100 and then 150, and I was like, holy cow, this is great. So just to give you an idea of where these producers are from, we've got, the largest state reporting was Kansas, probably because, most of the avenues that we used were Kansas-based. But we did have a very good representation of producers around the country, even up to Maine, down in Florida, and out in California and Oregon. We asked how many production units these producers had in one state or in multiple states. And of course, the majority only had one production unit in one state. Some of them, 12, had production units in 2 states, and we went all the way up to 8 states where 2 producers had production units in 8 states. I'm not sure if maybe that was a manager and an owner of a production unit reporting for the same one. All these answers were anonymous, so I cannot really say, why we have that number there. Moving on for some more demographics, just to get you oriented, we had on the x-axis, that's supposed to be number of respondents, and there on the y-axis is the type of production unit that these producers had. And you'll notice that it looks like there's more than 260 responses here. The respondents were instructed to select all that apply. So some of these producers could have had a cow-calf operation and a stocker operation. But the vast majority of these producers are cow-calf oriented. And for some of you who may not know, exactly the different areas of production in the beef industry, we'll go through that a little bit, just a little graphic to describe how the beef industry works. But to get into more specifics, I want to describe the different operations that we asked about. So a cow-calf operation is one in which most of our consumers and most of the people that are not as familiar with the beef industry tend to think of when they think of cattle. The cows out on pasture with their calves running around by their side. And this is the majority of the work that I did when I was out in practice was cow-calf work. From a cow-calf operation, calves can go into a number of different avenues. One of these is a stocker operation, where cattle are basically put out on grass to be fed for a certain amount of time, and just to kind of add that weight, and it's a little bit less expensive than putting them on feed on a concentrated diet. And it's a great use of land as well. Calves can also be sent to a backgrounder or grower yard, and this is a place where we can start these calves outright. They usually do preconditioning programs and start with a more forage-based diet and move along to a more concentrate-based diet, and really get these calves going and keep them healthy before they move to the finishing phase. And the finishing phase is what many people think, not as positively about, but I do think that there are some positives, for this area in our beef industry, and I work with a lot of these producers, and they do a great job. So that's kind of it for demographics. I'd like to move on to our questions about actual antibiotic use for these producers. And one of our questions was, how often are antibiotics used on your operation? And we divided that into oral antibiotics and injectable antibiotics. And as you can see, a lot of these producers are using these antibiotics less than once a month, or they're reporting that they use them less than once a month. And, the oral antibiotics, it was surprising to see that many producers didn't use them at all. So I think that they are doing a good job of, judicious use. Of course, these are self-reports. I can't determine, how truthful they were, but, most of these people in the industry, I think, are pretty honest. So. Another question we asked about antibiotic use was where these producers get their antibiotics that they use. And on the x-axis there, you can see we gave them choices. We wanted to avoid open-ended questions because we usually get a lot of answers that you aren't able to summarize very well. So we gave them these 4 choices. And the number of respondents is on the y-axis. And it's nice to see that a lot of our producers get their antibiotics from the veterinarian. Of course, we do still have over-the-counter products, at least in the majority of states in the United States right now. And, of course, distributors also can sell drugs to producers as well. One thing with antibiotic use, and I think we've addressed it just a little bit here, is following the directions and using them in the correct way. And so we wanted to ask about label directions and following them and how producers do that. And so we asked, are label directions always followed when antibiotics are used? And again, the majority of producers did say yes. And a follow-up question to that was, if label directions are not followed, do you consult with a veterinarian before using that drug off-label? And again, most producers said yes, they do. Sometimes we do have some that are no. I don't know what the circumstances were for those, but it's nice to see that most of them are consulting with their veterinarian. Oh. One question, even to follow up with that, that we asked was, are withdrawal times always followed when antibiotics are used? And we had 250 respondents to this question, 249 respondents to this question, and only one of them replied no to this question. But it was interesting, when we asked whether respondents think that adherence to withdrawal times are important, all respondents, including the person who said no here, said yes, we think that it's important. So I don't know if that was a discrepancy in survey taking, or that's an actual answer, but these producers do think that withdrawal times are important, which they are. Along with antibiotic use always comes, I think, your relationship with a veterinarian. We always need to talk about that when we talk about antibiotics in food animals. So we ask questions about producers' relationships with their veterinarian, and of course we had to ask the question, do you actually use the services of a veterinarian? And we asked, do you use them regularly? And 15% said, no, I do not use the services of a veterinarian regularly. But I think the key to that question is the word regularly. Because as we'll see in subsequent graphs, a lot of producers may not think that their utilization of a vet was on a regular basis. So when we asked how often do these people use the services of a veterinarian, it was interesting. The answer that got the most responses was other. A lot of the producers said semi-annually or quarterly. That's how often I use a veterinarian. But the majority, the answer with the most respondents was other. And so we asked them to specify if they said, oh, it's other. And this is what they came up with. And most of them said, we use the services of a veterinarian as needed. And I think that going back to the previous slide with the utilization of a vet regularly, this is probably where that comes in. We also had people say, well, we haul into the veterinarian. Personally, with my experience, that's probably usually on an as-needed basis. And of course, we have a couple that say never. I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. I feel like if they had a cow needed a C-section, they'd probably call a vet. So, and going back to that cow with a C-section, we asked why these producers had veterinarians visit their operation, and it was good to see that the most responses came for scheduled consultation visits. So these veterinarians are going out and talking to these producers about their operation. They also had scheduled appointments for sick or injured animals, and some clients, and I had a few, did use veterinarians just for emergencies, but even on those emergency calls, I feel like most vets are still kind of trying to give them advice and trying to talk them through some of the things that they could do on their operation, even during those emergency calls. I think a big thing with a producer and veterinarian relationship is, of course, the VCPR, veterinary client-patient relationship. And we asked the specific question, do you have a written, signed veterinary client-patient relationship with your veterinarian? And 3/4 of the producers said, no, I do not. And that was really surprising, but when I started to think about it, I got into the definitions of VCPR. And the FDA definition of a VCPR, don't worry, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but actually states that it's a relationship. It does not state that the terms of that relationship need to be outlined in a document and signed. Now, when we move on to guidelines for those VCPRs, the AABP guidelines say that, yes, we should have a written signed document that states the terms of those relationships. And I believe that, we should. But when I think about when I was in practice and I would go out and preg check or I would go out and fertility test bulls, I established that relationship with my clients. I didn't necessarily always have a document that stated that yes, we had this relationship. I had all my records, but we didn't say, hey, let's sit down, write out these terms, and sign it. And I think that's something that's going to come along in the future. And if I was still practicing, and after I've been to all these meetings where we've talked about these VCPRs, I think that's something that I would go back to my clinic and implement pretty quickly. So I hope that the veterinarians here are going to be able to do that in the near future. And I think that some of them probably will have to be with the VFD coming down the pipes. Along with veterinarians and their guidance on antibiotic use, we did ask if there were any useful programs outside veterinarians that help producers with, advice on antibiotics. And by far the most responses were for BQA, and that's beef quality assurance. And I would agree with that. I think BQA has some very, very good advice on antibiotic use, and even has some teaching tools about antibiotic resistance, and these producers can go in and learn about that, and I think they really glean a lot of good information. Of course, Veterinarian was another one that we've already spoken about. The AABP guidelines were quoted as a very good, useful tool. Some of them use label directions, which I think all of them should probably do that, and probably are. And then I had a few that just said, good old common sense. And while I think common sense does go a good way, especially in this industry, we can use other tools to help with our antibiotic use and our guidance. So now we get into some specific stuff, and right now, as you can see, we did want to ask about the veterinary fee directive. And only 200 of the 248 respondents to this question were aware of the VFD. I would like to see more respondents aware of it, and I think that that's one thing that we as veterinarians can go home and talk to our clients about just a little bit more and talk about that subject. When asked their opinions on the VFD, we did have some mixed responses. Some of them they didn't like it. Some of them were pretty positive about it, and quite a few had, a mixed opinion or, were completely indifferent. And I'd like to kind of share some of those responses. This was an open-ended question, so we did get some pretty candid responses, and I was pretty excited about that. One producer said, "I think it's bad. Most producers would not give antibiotics unless they were needed. A few bad apples ruin the whole basket." And, I think that can be said for any industry. A few bad apples can ruin the basket. One producer said, "It's good in a sense that it brings accountability to producers, yet bad that it is more regulation that the producer has to deal with." Some were indifferent. Again, one producer said, "I'm indifferent. It will make access to these tools more cumbersome, but we'll still use them," which I think is kind of a positive thing. They understand that, why this is happening and why we need to do things like this, but it's not going to stop them from using these tools that are effective. And we did get some positive responses. One person said, "I think that it's a great idea. I think it will give verification to the farmer. Our current society is so judgmental on where beef comes from and questions everything. This will show that the American farmers are raising high-quality beef for consumption." I always like to end on a little positive note, and I think that this person really, took it, that he or she is just kind of taking it in stride and saying, hey, you know what, let's turn this into a positive. So, we talk about VFD and why do we need to talk about VFD? Of course, the subject of antibiotic resistance always comes up. So we did ask a few questions, and they were mostly agree-disagree questions on antibiotic resistance. And we asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being strongly disagree and 10 being strongly agree, do you believe that resistance to antibiotics is an issue in the beef industry? And as you can see on that scale down there at the bottom, we did have a 0 to 10, something that the survey software did. But we kind of had a mixed bag of results, which was surprising. Now, again, this is, do you think that antibiotic use in the beef industry contributes to antibiotic use or resistance in the industry, not in the general population? We found that 67% of the respondents to this question were kind of on the negative side of things, and 33% said, I kind of agree with this. So I think that was interesting. I think that Dr. Lubers and Dr. Apley could probably teach some of these producers a little bit about antibiotic resistance in the beef industry. They should probably read Beef Magazine a little bit more. Talk to Dave, maybe. We did ask producer opinions on risk factors for antibiotic resistance in the beef industry, and this was an open-ended question, so I'm going to report the answers that I got most, and those were overuse of antibiotics in the beef industry, misuse of antibiotics in the beef industry, such as not following label directions, and lack of education about antibiotic use. And I think, again, that's kind of an area where veterinarians can really step in and take that role as an educator, because it's really, part of, we do a lot of, not so fun stuff. To me, that's part of the fun part of being a veterinarian, is educating your clients. Again, with antibiotic resistance, we asked the question about resistance in the general population. We asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all and 10 being contributes a lot, how much do you believe antibiotic use in the beef industry contributes to resistance in the general, which is human and livestock population? And we see, an even bigger shift to the left here, with 88% saying, I really think that it doesn't contribute at all, or I kind of think it doesn't contribute at all. And only 12% saying it does contribute. And of course, these divisions are kind of arbitrary. I did them myself, but I think it kind of reflects the attitudes of the consumers very well. And then we got into the producer perspective on consumer attitudes, which I thought was kind of fun. We asked, do you think consumers are knowledgeable on the subject of antibiotic use on beef production units? And 98% of these producers, it was pretty much a resounding no. And I can understand where they're coming from. I'm a almost 30-year-old woman, and all my friends are having kids and asking, and they ask me questions quite regularly about this. And the veterinarian in me is like, why are you asking this question? But then I think about it, and I'm like, well, the only time that you've ever seen cattle are, when you come to my house and you see them out in the pasture. So I can see where both sides are coming from. Again, one of our scale questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being completely ignorant and 10 being very knowledgeable, how knowledgeable do you think consumers are of antibiotic use on beef production units? And we definitely see that producer attitudes, towards consumer perceptions are not necessarily the greatest. But again, I think, as veterinarians and, industry, people in industry, we can really work to educate both consumers and producers, because I think producers can be educated about consumer perceptions as well. And lastly, we asked an open-ended question about producers' perceptions of consumer attitudes. And I wanted to end up with a few quotes. These are not all the quotes that we got, but I wanted to share a little bit with you. Some producers stated, one producer said that they feel, and they're referring to consumers, they feel that we are doing a terrible job and are treating every animal with antibiotics unnecessarily. One person said, they don't understand our usage, which is mainly ionophores, which do not affect human medicine, and they assume that we are just giving injections left and right. They don't know we undergo training and that we don't want to have sick animals, period, let alone that it is an additional cost. This person had an interesting perspective. They said, I hear some of my in-laws, nieces, nephews, and acquaintances make comments about the high levels of antibiotics, pesticides, and hormones in beef. They want to buy beef from me because I don't use those things. I attempt to correct the misconceptions, but a few months later, they will make similar statements. And I have found this, again, with my friends who have children, they talk about things like this, but then a couple months later, we're talking about the same thing again. And it does get a little disheartening to keep talking about it, and feel like your point's not getting across. But I think, that's what we have to do. That's what we're doing here. We keep talking about it, and eventually we're going to make an impact. And then, I do like to end off on some positives. One producer said the vocal consumers sound off like irresponsible drug use is the norm, but the average person doesn't pay much attention to the issue. In spite of some bad press, I think most consumers trust the system. And finally, one person said, most think that beef producers do what is necessary to keep an animal healthy. And, I really think that a lot of consumers do think that we're doing the best that we can to keep these animals healthy. Now, some consumers may think that we have different reasons for doing so, but I know that, all my producers, they wanted to care for those animals in the best way possible. And I think that's what we need to bring to consumers. So, moving along, I believe, consumers do have a right to be heard, but so do producers. And they work so hard every day. And I showed you, the people that do this work, and how hard they do work. They work too hard to watch their industry change, and just stand back and watch. We here in academia, in our veterinary clinics, we have the time and the resources to give them a voice. And, we should use these resources to do so, with projects like this and others. Finally, I want to leave off with, our components to a stewardship program that was presented here last year. Pollack and Srinivasan, I'm sorry if I butchered that name. But, they proposed 7 components to a good antibiotic stewardship program. And I think that these are all very good components. I think they are all needed in not just an antibiotic stewardship program, but any stewardship program. And of course, we can go into what these actually mean, but I believe that these are available in their publication, so I won't go too deep into these. But I want you to think about where producers fit into these components. And personally, I believe that they fit in everywhere. You need leadership in the producer. In producers, you need these producers to be accountable. They have the on-site expertise. They take action. They can do tracking, they can do reporting, and, they can take part in education and training, both, on the receiving end and on the giving end, because I think that, some producers are very, very, very good at educating people. And, as a new veterinarian out in Lyman, Colorado, they were very good at educating me. Sometimes in a good way, and sometimes, I really got embarrassed, but that's okay. I did learn a lot from all my producers, and I think that education is a huge part of things.